All right. And so, yeah, so yesterday, or not yesterday, Tuesday, we introduced the Capstone kind of like expectations and stuff like that. So we went through that kind of stuff. Are there any questions from like last time that we maybe like popped in your head, like after we finished the meeting or anything like that? No, pretty good. Okay, good, good. All right, so I'm trying to pull up here. Here, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share with you guys the document. I'm going to use a slightly separate document than we usually have for the cohort to put in questions and stuff. So Gina, also you can use this link too. I'll make sure to send it out in a second on Zoom. I'm trying to remember what, I can't remember my text expander. It's been so long. This is how I cheat and remember all of my stuff. There we go. Oh, that's wrong. Sorry, this is my text expander. Do you guys know what a text expander is by chance? Has anyone come across this before? Oh, good, head shakes. So text expanders are really nice. So for example, if I'm going to use like, for example, this Capstone discussion questions, it's a long URL for Google Drive, right? I'm like, Google Docs. So I can save it in a text expander ahead of time, and I can actually type Q cap, and it'll expand out whatever I have, which is really, really useful. But it's also useful, like, you know, for those little things. That's how actually I have like specific, was it Zoom links for all of you guys when we do one-on-ones and assessments and stuff like that. I don't remember it. For example, if I had, you know, like Alvaro, for example, I would do Z, and then I'd type Alvaro's in. I'm not going to type the whole thing, that way you guys don't see it's a link. But if I typed the O in here, it would expand the whole link. For example, if I do Z cap, it'll expand the whole link out there, which is really useful. But it's also nice because oops, sorry. Let's undo this part. There we go. It's also really nice because you can also do things like for programming. So for example, I have this, if I put in semicolon, semicolon, ds pi, it's kind of nice because I don't have to remember all those extra parts. It'll import all my things, which is like, generally you're importing the same stuff all the time anyway. So this is kind of like a really nice shortcut and stuff. And you can do some really fun advanced stuff. I personally have used this thing called ATEX. This is kind of unrelated to Capstone, but general advice, right? It's always useful. I use ATEX, which is for Mac, which is what the computer I'm on right now. If you're using Windows, a really useful one is Auto Hotkey. In fact, I would say Auto Hotkey is much more powerful than ATEX. There's a bunch of them out there too, but I found ATEX really useful because I think it's like $5 for like, yeah, $5 for the thing, and it's a lifelong license. So I don't know, I'm not sponsored by ATEX, I don't get any money or anything like that, but I think those tools are really useful. For a long time, I didn't pay for it because you can try it out for free. And then finally, I was like, I use this all the time. I should just pay for this. So yeah.
So when you typed in, when you typed in semicolon, semicolon, whatever it was, where's that calling from?
Yeah, so you can actually define them. So let me show you a little bit. Let me just go show ATEX. And oops, remind me later about this import. So let's say, for example, programming. I have my DS imports. I can define my imports right here. And basically whatever I type here will come up right here. And what's nice too is you can actually put other things as well. For example, this guy right here actually calls another one, which is just the plotting imports, which is the plotting stuff I use.
See.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I can't
I'm
see.
sorry. I realize I'm just, sorry, I'm seeing it and I realize I'm just sharing part of my screen. I'm just gonna share my whole screen. How's that?
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I was just
I'm glad you called me out on that because I would have kept going on, and people would be like, what is he talking about? Okay, here's my desktop one. All right, now move you guys out of the way so you guys don't have to stare at yourself all day. So, sorry, so this is my whole setup right here. And so this is, I have it as in ATEX for Mac. I can select like the specific like expansion, and it'll expand it out from here. So for example, I showed a little bit, like if I go Capstone for question stock for Capstone, it shows up right here. And I could have done the same thing by actually typing it out. So if I want to actually add something on here, on this window here, which is just like, I do show ATEX, right? And I can import my own stuff. I have it, you can see I have different folders here depending on what I want to talk about, like what I'm doing to expand. So programming here, I have DS imports. And so I have basically the abbreviation here. So that's the thing that if I type it, it'll expand this all out. As you see, import NumPy, import pandas, and I have plotting, and actually call this plotting imports right here. So that way I can actually have my text expansion call other shortcuts and stuff like this. And what's nice too, you can see this one, for example, is that if I have something like Python code where I'm like, I want to share this with people, this actually uses the clipboard and actually moves my cursor down here. So let's say, for example, I have like, I don't know, hello. Okay, well, like that. And I copy this right here. So this is in my clipboard. So I'm just cutting that. And then I just go ahead and put backslash or backtick Python, or sorry, PyCode. It actually takes whatever I have in my clipboard and actually pastes that in there, which can be really useful. So these are little things that like can be helpful when you start doing stuff. Especially this one is one that I always use constantly because you can call the HTML. You can import from IPy and be a thing that will render HTML from the code itself. So I'll use this a lot where I want to actually say, hey, just display this as HTML. So yeah, honestly, this is not as powerful as I personally want it to be, but it's the best thing I found, like on Mac at least.
So is this something that is only you can only use it in like Google Docs, or could you literally use this with your Jupyter notebooks and stuff like that?
Yeah, literally wherever you want. So let's say I open up my Jupyter notebook. We'll talk about this today. Yeah, this literally basically, it acts as your keyboard essentially. So if I do something like, you know, PSPY, imports it just like that. So
how about that?
For example, like this guy right here, as you can probably tell, this is what I use a lot for when I send you guys stuff on Slack. Like it's like, here's some Python code, you know, and this will actually automatically render properly on Slack and everything. So yeah.
That's cool. And then, but the only issue is if you then publish your notebook out to GitHub and somebody wants to look at it and all you had, well, I guess it puts it in. So you only have to do it once and then.
That's right. It's kind of like, if you imagine like autocorrect like on your phone and it like expands out, you know, what it is, except it's like a little more than autocorrect essentially. I think Mac actually has something like this, a text expander built into the settings, but it's not as powerful. You can't do like clipboard and stuff like this. And I find this pretty useful. And this, you can save this as like, you can back this up essentially. So it's nice to have that option. Yeah, sorry, kind of a little off, but I don't know, sometimes it's useful to know these little things. Not everyone uses this. I used to use this a lot for when I did doing software development stuff, because there's some iterations you do over and over and over again. You're like, so annoying to type out everything one. Anyone who knows Java is exactly like this. You're writing the same stuff over again and over again. But I find it interesting, a lot more people don't know about this kind of tool, which I don't know, I think it's pretty useful. And it's only, this one's only $5, so it's like, even if it's not even if it's feature limited, that's pretty good. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that was kind of a little little extra tip for you guys and all that stuff. But I'll try to show you guys that too as we kind of go through Capstone, because I think it's useful to talk about things like that's going to make you a better and more efficient, you know, data scientist especially when you're programming and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So all right, I did want to go through this really quickly and then just kind of open up to any general questions that you guys might have. This notebook should be in the repo, like you guys can see my desk expansion there, because I don't want to type that whole thing out. I think it's under projects and then general advice. Yeah, it's up here. So it is on the repo too. You guys can find this. And I think I've talked about this before too, but it's kind of useful to talk about. It's like, okay, what does this project look like? Because again, your Capstone isn't anything specifically different from the other mod projects, but you're just gonna have basically the longer end-to-end process and stuff like that. So it kind of helps a little bit. Just remember, this is a good useful reminder, especially my cohort who's going through Mod 4 projects right now. Make sure you turn in your material. That means your blog post, your repo, your video recording link. Turn it in before the assessment. That way I can check it out before we actually have the assessment and see everything up there. Remember to have all the elements ready in order to pass. So the blog is part of your Capstone assessment, right? It's part of that thing. So I can't pass your assessment until you have that blog in there. So just make sure you remember those things. I think in general, people tend to like, they'll say, oh, I got it all done. And then they say like, and I'll say, did you have the blog ready? And they're like, oh shoot, I forgot about the blog. And they'll kind of like write something up. So don't forget. For your notebook, you guys know Jupyter Notebook at this point. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but aren't we supposed to have like 7 blog posts?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So to graduate, we'll need 7 blog posts total. The good news is that you already wrote, if you finish the 4th project, 4 of them, 5 of them when you have the capstone all set, right? When you're done with the capstone, you have 5 blog posts, and then you have to write 2 additional blog posts that are not related to any project. I mean, you can write the blog posts in relation to some projects. I've had students do that as long as it's like independent from, it's not like changing one word from like your previous blog post, but 2 additional ones besides the module project ones.
Cool.
Cool. All right. And then you guys know how to turn it into, like, I know this is, I'll go over this again. You can basically turn them in through this blog. I think that's not your blog. I always forget about this blog dashboard. I think it's this one. There you go. If you guys go to blog dashboard, you can then turn them in. It looks like this is just like text, but it's actually like you can type here and just post your blog here, especially because I think most people write a Medium blog post, and this is how you would submit those additional ones. But as we get closer, or if you finish your blog post, just let me know. It's a little funky, to be honest, but as long as we have the links, yeah, it's easy for me to find them, and we can internally at FYI and make sure like everything's marked off correctly. Okay, cool. Yes, good thing, Jessica, thank you again for iterating that, because that's what you need to graduate. All right, so notebook, I'm just kind of going through my list here. If you guys have questions or something off topic, interrupt me, right? You guys know your Jupyter Notebook at this point. I think it's actually Jupyter. No, this is Jupyter Notebook. Everyone uses Jupyter Notebook. Does anyone use like Jupyter Lab or something different by chance? Just kind of curious. I don't think so. I think everyone's been using Jupyter Notebook. So you guys know how this all works, how to keep your notebook, but it's nice to think about like how we keep our notebook clean. Really think about, like I emphasize the data science lifecycle. This is a very general like step set, right? There's no framework in particular, but I think in general, this is the way you can kind of think about it no matter what framework you use. Basically starting off with that business understanding, make it clear in your notebook saying, hey, this is my business problem. These are the business questions, and I say business, doesn't have to literally be business, but what do my stakeholders care about? And this is what I'm going to do in this project to try to answer those questions for my stakeholders. Like starting off there in your notebook, clearly at the beginning at some point is going to make it easier to read through your notebook. And then having a general process where in general you're doing data mining, meaning data acquisition. So that means like collecting the data. Most of you guys probably can do web scraping, but what you could do is something along the lines of, like I think I showed a little bit with my, was it with the random forest neural network with traffic signs? I showed a little bit how you can download it automatically. That would be kind of nice to put in there. But basically making sure the data can be accessible, whoever gets this notebook. While I'm on that too, I'm a little sidetracking, but don't upload your data to GitHub. That's not usually typical. And you might do that. You might do a git add the data, and then do commit later, and then do a git push, and then you run into those issues. I see some head-ons right now where people are like, yes, I think I've hit this exact thing. So you learn the hard way, right? And then you have to do some funny git mess, which usually ends up saying, I'm just gonna make a new repo, because it's a lot easier than trying to rebase everything. So don't add your data to there, but at least have a way where your whoever takes your notebook, whoever's reading your notebook, knows where this data comes from and they can reproduce it themselves. So that could be an outside source, a link and stuff like that. Okay. So you have your data cleaning or data acquisition. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that?
Mm-hmm.
I can wait too if it's better till we
Yeah,
get. Okay, cool. Thanks. So like, I ended up doing like the Zillow time series, and I went to Zillow to download more like recent data, and it was over the like 50. I don't know, is that gigabytes or something, whatever the data size is. And so it was having trouble uploading it. So then I did something with like Homebrew, which then let me upload like a larger data set, but it still kind of has problems. Like it works while I'm in it, but when I come back to it, it's like not there anymore.
Is it Git LFS?
Yes, that's what it is.
Yes. Maybe we should talk about this one day, because this is what you can do. It's basically for large file storage, right? Git large file storage. It basically, it doesn't actually, add the files, it adds a reference to those files. And so in the end, whoever gets your notebook still has to get the data from some source, but it won't be stored on GitHub, for example. And so that's probably like what happens where you're like, oh, it let me add the data, but then it's like not actually there, or it's doing weird stuff. It's because you're basically, it's expecting you to get the data in some other form or fashion, and then it references that data. So it can be useful in some cases and stuff like this. I think I don't talk about it too much at this level, just because it's useful, but like it's not necessary for a lot of things that you need. A lot of cases, like all you need to do is just basically say, hey, where can you get this data? Maybe add a download link, or have it, what I do in my notebooks, I literally have like a download the data and like unzip it for the person. So I don't have to rely on the person getting the data themselves and then knowing how to unzip it themselves, if that makes sense. There are some workarounds like this. So maybe one day we can talk about this. I'm actually going to add a little new question here. So handling data for your repo. So maybe we'll talk about that, because there are some ways you can get around this. One thing is called a release on GitHub. It's kind of a loophole. It's not exactly what it's meant to do, but you can sometimes attach data up to 2 gigabytes large to a release setting. And so you can have like a zip file, and at least there someone else can download it, or at least it's hosted there, so it's preserved and ready for someone to download. Versus like if I get it from a third party, let's say for example you get it Zillow, but then Zillow goes out of business and they don't like have the files available, or the link's broken or something like that, then you're like, oh shoot, like the data's kind of gone, like unless you have it saved somewhere else. So there's some options you can go around there. Okay.
Yeah, I also remember that I mentioned to you there's another place.
Oh yeah.
DVC. DVC was created. It's a Git-like place created for data science. So they allow, you can put a lot larger files in it.
Yeah, and this is, I remember you talking about this, Alvaro. Have you played around with this at all yet?
Not yet. At some point I plan to.
Yes, this might be interesting. From what I remember when you were showing me, it's like Git, but it's slightly, like you said, revision for like data scientists. I haven't played around with it, so I don't know much about it at all, like how it works and what issues you can do. But might be worth looking at if you guys want to play around with DVC. That's nice.
Yeah. When you read right there, DVC track ML models and data sets, it's built to make. Oops, you passed it.
Oh, sorry. I realized you're reading from me.
No. Yeah. So it says that it is designed to handle large files, data sets, and machine learning models.
Yeah. So this right here is the big part, because as you guys have seen, you can train the model, but then you want to be able to save your models too. In general, you don't tend to save the models on Git unless it's relatively small. So what I've seen a lot of people do is essentially like, we call these like artifacts, right? The machine learning model weights and stuff like this. You save these artifacts from the training process, which just think artifacts being like the values that aren't inherently designed in there. Like you have to train it to get those values. What do you do with those? Because those are important, right? People will host it in different places. In one of those things I've seen that's actually, I think, the most clean way to do it is you have your GitHub repo, but then you tie onto a release on your GitHub repo your files, which includes data in your models themselves. And that way you can actually reference it. So it definitely some funkiness sometimes, but as you guys get closer and stuff like that, we can definitely talk about like what things you can do. That way other people can reproduce your work too. And it's nice to see that too, because it means that, to be honest, if you don't save your models, you don't save your data in some form or fashion, and let's say a recruiter or interviewer or whatever comes across your project or asks you about the project, 99% of the time, I would say no one really like is going to bat an eye being like, can you get the models for it? But for reproducible sakes, especially if you want something that actually people can use, then you might want to think about like, how can people access your information and stuff like that. And it's like a little bit of icing on the cake, where if you show you do this and you emphasize this too, saying, oh, I actually make sure these models are accessible to someone, it kind of adds a little bit like, oh, the interviewer or recruiter's like, oh, cool. Like you're thinking beyond just like one and done project. You're thinking about like, oh, how can this be useful? Which again, is probably what you're going to be using like in the real world industry setting. You want to be able to work with other people and have people reproduce your work. So yeah. But definitely a lot of options. We should definitely talk about this one day. But it's a whole bunch we could talk about for sure. I want to make sure we dedicate enough time to go through those different options. Cool. Yeah, I'll have to look at this, Alvaro, because I haven't heard too much about it. But okay, so let's see here. Yeah, I was just talking about the cycle. Data, you see, just data acquisition. That was just the second step that we were talking about. But yeah, basically make sure the data is somehow accessible so someone knows where to find it. Don't add it to your GitHub repo in general unless it's relatively small, but usually you don't just because it's pretty common practice. And then your actual cleaning, data exploration, having those steps, you don't have to literally say data cleaning, data exploration, but at least having like kind of like in your mind that this is kind of like a segment, it kind of helps like keep your notebook in kind of a readable sense. And this is like, makes it look like it's a very like, you know, you guys know this already. It makes it look like it's like, oh, going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're done, you know, wipe your hands and all finished. You definitely will kind of go back and forth. But I would say is that if you're making a notebook so other people can reproduce it, you might basically make a notebook where you're kind of playing around with stuff and then having a notebook or the same notebook even, that's what I tend to do, and organize your code so then basically you can do all the data cleaning or data exploration more or less in one go versus like trying to hop around different places. This kind of keeps it easy to understand. It's not exactly what you did and reproduced, but it's reproducible now for someone else knowing what you know. Makes sense to people, right? All right. Yeah, so some things to kind of keep in mind besides like the data science lifecycle, right? Keep a notebook clean and organized. Like I said, that kind of helps thinking about in this progression. Let's have any notes in here. Yeah, this is one thing that I will really emphasize a lot. Like maybe not everyone, like every other instructor does, but I do think it's an important part that stands out a lot is using Markdown in your notebooks to explain, hey, I did this graph, I did this model, you know, this is a confusion matrix. When you guys have your assessment, you guys generally will like say, you know, like, oh, I did this, like, you know, ask like, oh, like, what did you see or what did you notice here? And you can tell me, like, you guys immediately know, like, oh, yes, you know, I noticed there's this issue here. It's like, oh, I want to do this. And a lot of times people will not write that down in the Markdown. And so what I tell people, it's like, you know, if I'm reading this notebook through, you're not there with me telling me what you've noticed. And so having that in Markdown, your thoughts down on paper, really emphasizes that you are about communicating your results and communicating your knowledge. So in reality, like I said, is anyone really going to like, you know, is a recruiter or a hiring manager really going to go into fine tooth comb and read every Markdown? Almost 100% guaranteed not going to happen. But as you scroll through it, it definitely stands out because the norm, unfortunately, for a lot of data science, not just students, but data science who just kind of do stuff online, there's just a bunch of graphs and tables and code and stuff, but doesn't tell me like, what is it that you saw? Like you are supposed to be knowledgeable in this specific thing. You tell me what you saw and why you did the next thing. And that's what I want to emphasize to you guys is putting that little bit of Markdown. And that could just be a sentence or two. It doesn't have to be a whole 3 paragraphs for every little code cell.
Kind of like writing like a researcher.
Yeah, I think you can think about it. This is a Jupyter notebook. If you ever do anything with science, like you have a notebook, you're writing your results, you're writing your comments as you're going through it. That's kind of the idea. If you have a narrative, your notebook in a lot of ways in science is talking to you, you know, as you're reading it. That's kind of like how this Jupyter notebook should kind of read, is that it's your voice, your narrative saying like, okay, these are the things I'm noticing. These are the things that I think I should pursue with. Yeah. Make sense, people? Cool. I think that, in my opinion, that's not emphasized enough in general in data science. And it's, I mean, there's so like, I don't know, maybe it's because of my science background, but like data science, like it's kind of what it is. It's a notebook. It's like, yes, that's what you do. So anyway, and it'll definitely stand out if you put that in there. Other things, keep it organized, use functions. I think at this stage, like you guys generally know how to write your cell code and stuff like that and identify when you're going to be repeating the same process over and over again. A common one, for example, I see a lot of people do is doing your, what's it called? like making your confusion matrix, and it's the same code for a confusion matrix over and over again. And usually what you're doing is basically copying all the stuff in that cell, putting in a new cell, changing one value, and then running that whole cell. Make that a function, because then it's a lot easier to modify that. If you can get to the point, I think I showed a little bit of what I had for the traffic sign. I had some functions. You don't have to go into that extreme, but having a little bit more functions that kind of like do a process to the same, like let's say you do multiple neural networks. You can use that function to do that multiple times and have slight variations on it versus like trying to copy all of the cell and then rerun the whole code and stuff like that. I think it helps where you have a little more modular for the function. It makes it easier to iterate too. Okay, cool. That's your document, what you're doing. Comments and doc strings. So doc strings for your functions, comments for your code. Your comments in your code, remember, it's not saying the data science part of like what you're noticing it. The comments are saying what your code is doing. So you don't have to do it for literally every single line of code. You know, if you really want to, you could, but you're probably having too many comments. But I'd rather have you guys have too many comments than not enough comments. So you might want to use a comment to say, oh, you know, like running a model, like a bidirectional model here. And you might just have a little comment there and go through. And you might say something like early stopping, like you have some early stopping code or an optimizer. You say optimizing the code, you know, making sure we stop, you know, after not seeing any changes. Like that's kind of the comments you would put down. You don't have to have literally, like, for example, if you do like a for loop, you don't need to doing a for loop over this list. Like, yeah, we can read that. But if you say like, we're going to iterate over this list to find, you know, the maximum value, like that might be the comment for like the next like 5 lines of code. Okay, makes sense? Cool. All right. Yes. So I love this. I think I made this up because I was having fun one day. A comment a day will keep long debugging sessions at bay. Remember, you're just trying to help yourself. Like, so not just other people can read your code, but also you can check and see what you are doing. Because there's been plenty of times where I've come back to my code and I'm like, what was I even doing? I don't remember. And a comment usually really helps where you can say, oh, that's what I was doing. You can go back to it. Okay. If you're really good at this, you can basically just read your comments and just like not even look at your code and know exactly what you're doing. So one way you can do that, even, and this is what I kind of like to do, is you use your comments to pseudocode, which basically is kind of like you use your comments to say, hey, this is the code I'm going to do. And then you like essentially like map out your plan of attack, like your read in data file, drop unneeded columns, ID is improperly read, make it a string. Like having those comments in there, I can read this out loud and you guys can probably picture what code you would write underneath each of those comments. And that's literally what I do. It's like I literally say, okay, here are my comments, and I'll just go say, okay, like, you know, pd.read, you know, CSV, you know, and read the actual, you know, thing in there. And it helps keep me organized and make sure I don't miss a step. And what's nice is that when you're done with it, it's already commented. You don't have to go back and like make new comments for it. Okay. Any questions or comments on comments? Anything else? Yeah. Cool. All right. Yes. So I know these are stuff you probably already know, but it's worth reiterating. Narratives. I always talk about narratives, making sure you actually have a narrative, talking about like what are the results you have, and you're talking to your stakeholders or who's your audience. In some cases where you're doing your non-technical presentation, you're talking about non-technical stakeholders who might not be familiar with data science. And your notebooks, you can be much more technical and not have to worry about explaining like, oh, you know, an F1 score or accuracy or validation loss or whatever it is. You can just talk about it as if you assume that they understand what those things are. If you come across something that's maybe a little different that maybe a data scientist might not know, you might want to kind of talk a little bit about it. But the point is that you want someone to be able to read your notebook top to bottom and understand kind of like it, like the best notebooks would be like teleporting them into your shoes and like they're following along with you as you're running it. And that's kind of the idea of this narrative where you want to kind of guide through. Now, it might not literally be exactly how you proceed in doing it, but it'll have all the information that you will get to, if that makes sense. So like you might realize in your cleaning step, you get down to feature engineering, you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to clean this part. Well, in reality, you did all of this and then cleaned this new thing. You might still put it in data cleaning. And you might comment saying, you know, like, we're doing this now because if we didn't do this, we'd come into these issues. You know, you can even state like, you know, here's a little sidetrack of like what issues we saw.
So in in our notebooks, we don't have to do things like you might see in a blog where you say, oh, I'm going to use cat boost. Oh, cat boost is this, and kind of, go into an explanation of what cat boost is, right?
Yeah, you don't have to go to that level. Like
No.
if you would like to, like there's not a reason why you couldn't do that. I would say at most, like you might say like, okay, we're gonna do a neural net, like for example, let's say, oh, we're gonna do this, fully connected neural network for these reasons, or oh, these are the things that might have issues like with a convolution neural net, or this is the reason why we're using convolution neural net.
According to dictionary.com, verb.
I don't know, enough. That's weird. That was my phone. But anyway, like you don't have to go into the full details of everything like that. But
an explanation as to why you chose the model might be
exactly
the reason, right?
Yeah, you might say along the lines of like, let's say you're using some, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something, a random forest, and you don't need to explain what a random forest is, but you say, well, I'm using a random forest in this case because of these reasons. Cool. So definitely use your narrative so it's easy to follow. And then again, think of it like you're talking with a data scientist, a data-minded person. So, you can think of like your notebook to be more technical. And again, like on the assessment, it's more of a conversation. You can almost think of it like when you're writing down your notebook, especially those markdown cells. It's like you can pretend you're like, what one might do if you're like, oh, I didn't put any markdown cells, is literally like pretend you're talking to someone else going through your notebook. In those points where you're talking about something that's not on your notebook, that's the stuff you write down. So yeah. All right. Any questions on this notebook guy? I think you guys are pretty familiar now using it and such. I use headings and stuff like that. I think that kind of keeps your notebooks nice and neat. Sometimes people like to have multiple notebooks. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure they're easy to find for the person going through your repo. So one thing I suggest is having either a README or another notebook that references those other notebooks, so people can like go to one central source, essentially it's like a table of contents, so they can go to the separate notebooks that you might have. Okay, cool. Awesome. So let's hear presentation. So again, this will be like your 5th non-technical presentation, right? At that point. I mean, heck, some of you guys are going to be going through your Mod 4 presentation soon. So it's good to kind of remember about this. And this again, like I was talking with another cohort not too long ago, and I kind of was going on and on about presentations and stuff like that. And I was like saying, I'm a little bit of a stickler for like certain style stuff. I don't know if I told you about this. I had a high school teacher back in like my senior year, and he told us that it's like, oh, like we're not going to do any oral presentations in this class. And one of my peers, like one of the students in there, like was like got really offended by this, and it's like, why aren't we doing like, or it's like, why aren't we doing oral presentations? Which I don't understand still to this day, like who asked for that, but that's kind of like, that was kind of like their level. And the teacher said to us, and I remember it so clearly, he got really serious and said, I'd rather roll in broken glass than listen to you guys do an oral presentation. And like it definitely offended like that person who asked and stuff like that. But I mean, I think he has a point, is that so many presentations can feel very just draining. And remembering that is like, what do you need to do to make a presentation engaging? Because boring sometimes is going to be boring because like, oh, the material, whatever. But a lot of times it comes down to the fact that like you're doing things that might make it more boring. You want to engage. And one really easy way to engage someone is essentially don't just like replace you with stuff on slides. Like if someone can take your presentation and just look at the presentation and not listen to you at all, like put you on mute, or you step away and you just go to the slides yourself, and they can get everything they need from that slide, it's gonna be really boring because they're like, I can read all this. Like they're reading everything and then they're waiting for you to finish to go to the next slide. So you wanna make sure that, and like, even if it's like not intentional, they're gonna subconsciously be thinking that, and they're gonna read it. For example, if I literally expand everything out here and I put this all out, because I guaranteed, who's already read this sentence right here? Like it's on here. You guys are gonna look at it. You guys are gonna read it right away because it's there. So that's my biggest thing, is like, make your slides smaller where digestible by one thing. Don't put huge amount of information, whether it's visual information or textual information. Okay, cool. So a couple things, right? take into account your time. So one thing people tend to do is they tend to, especially with a capstone, they tend to go on the over end side. If it's supposed to be about a 5 to 8 minute presentation, so kind of plan accordingly. Like you don't need to put everything together. Think about like, what would you talk to a stakeholder if they literally at 10 minutes, they stopped you and threw you out the door? Like making sure you get into the stuff that yours is important. So too short is also bad. Like don't go through it really quickly and say, all right, those are my results. And like, it's a 2-minute presentation. Like expect to take 5 to 8 minutes. And I think most people do pretty well on that. You are the subject of the presentation, not the slides, right? Like you need to make sure your slides are emphasizing your points, not replacing what your points are. Or like the information, like it's not your slides giving a presentation, you're giving a presentation and you have that knowledge and you should share that knowledge and help guide your audience in that right way. Kind of looking at the more like bigger picture, if you make your slideshow more accessible to anyone who's going through it, you can adjust the way you present your information depending on like if it's a technical stakeholder. It's like, I was like, oh, we actually know like this is for data scientists, you know, or like, oh, this is actually for a group of people who don't know any math, essentially, you know, like if you focus your presentation where the presentation slides emphasize your points, you can adjust to what degree that you want to talk about things. So it keeps you flexible too. So just kind of be aware of that. Less is more, but make it meaningful, right? So don't give too much text, info, words on a page. I say like, you know, to help avoid words is use sentence fragments is really useful. Don't use full sentences unless it's like a definition. And this is one thing I think I don't know what it is, but like people tend to try to squeeze too much information on a slide. There's no reason why you can't split the slides into smaller pieces and just, you know, let's say you take 2 minutes to explain this one topic and you make one slide for it, but there's too much information. Still take 2 minutes to talk about the thing, but just split it up into like, you know, 2 to like 4 other slides. And that usually keeps your audience engaged too, because they're not staring at the same thing for the next 2 minutes. They're kind of like getting engaged by moving on to the next part. Okay. Consider your audience. Like I said, just being technical versus non-technical and stuff like that. This is where a lot of people, I've been guilty of this, is that sometimes giving too much information to an audience where really they don't really care that much. Like I remember spending a lot of time designing like, you know, a certain algorithm essentially. And I thought it was really impressive. Basically it was a formula. And in the end, no one really cared, which just kind of makes, to be fair, they shouldn't really care, because why do they need to know this formula? They just need to know the results of this and like can be applied. So just kind of be aware of your audience, right? I mentioned this here, more accurate data does not mean clear data. Like make sure your points are emphasized. And I think you guys have gotten really good at this, where you guys, if there is something like an outlier or a part that's emphasized, using some visual element, like literally like a circle on a page, or, you know, not showing that information and just showing the important aspects. That helps emphasize those points. And then one thing kind of related to that is your three recommendations that we talk about for the rubric. Have each recommendation, everything that you're saying, as a separate slide, because that emphasizes each one being important, which they should be. Because in the end, if you split recommendations, you put 3 recommendations on a slide, they're not going to remember, they're going to remember, oh, there's a recommendation slide, but what was the 3 bullet points versus like, oh, recommendation number 1, this topic, recommendation number 2, this topic, recommendation number 3, this topic. And it's a little easier for people to remember that because they're important versus like having them all together. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. But I think you guys have been doing pretty well at this. I'll go through this really quickly. I mostly repeat most of this stuff. Each slide contains a single thought or concept, so you use multiple slides. No more than 3 points per slide. Again, these are like rough rules, right? I've seen people use more than 3 bullet points, and it's perfectly fine. I think if you start going more 3, justify for yourself, you need that 4th, 5th bullet point. If you see 6 bullet points on there, it's probably better just to split up into a new slide. Okay. Only using sentence fragments and like definitions and stuff like that. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Also about bullets, like I found for myself that like animating them helps. So if there are 3, like rather than all 3 at once, doing like 1 and then the 2nd and then the 3rd, and it like gives it a clean, it's like easier to follow, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that is really a big part, is that I think you've done this, Jessica, like on a presentation. I know people do this, is like if you have multiple ones, even more than 3, giving to someone one at a time can be really useful, because then they're only focusing on the new information as you're presenting it. Yeah. Right, so let's hear. Sentence fragments, visual and pictures. Like this visual, it's a little complicated. I don't know what people are, like, obviously this is kind of intense, but like I do see things along those lines where there's a bunch of data points. I'm like, I don't need all those data points in there. Like, tell me, first of all, which line should I care about? And then do I need to see each data point on that line, or do I just need a line itself? Like, this is where a line plot, even though you use a scatter plot, it might make more sense. This case is like a time series data, but you might actually want to reduce the complexity of your visualization just so you can make it easier. And then you can talk about the nuances too. If you want to, if you're like, it's like, I don't want it to like show a simplified version. I want to make sure I show the data itself. If you really are adamant on that, a suggestion I would have is like maybe show, like, for example, a scatter plot. And so you have like a regression line going through it. And then like next slide, kind of like Jessica was saying, like animate, have just the regression line. Because that's the thing that really matters. It's not so much about the individual data points, unless there's a specific reason why you want to show those data points. Okay, cool. Yeah, any questions on this or comments on presentation stuff? Pretty good, cool. All right, just a reminder, the video, like, is part of the assessment part, but like, don't stress out about it. Like, practice it a couple times, record yourself once. You don't have to watch it afterwards. As long as it's actually recorded, make sure it's actually recorded. But like, you don't have to like redo your video over and over again. Like, I'm gonna watch the video at most like twice, like to see it's there and everything like that. But so don't stress out about that part. Most of it's just the presentation itself. Yeah, Jessica.
I have a question. How do we record a video with us in the corner?
Oh, like, so like if you guys have like the little Zoom window like over here.
Is that how we do it? Yeah.
Oh, you guys can't see my Zoom window.
Okay.
Okay. But you mean like, oh, I have a little corner over here. Like, I think most of the recordings I have, right, I'm like in the little corner.
Yes, like that. How do we do that?
Yeah, I believe, you know what? I think, hold on a second. You see my Zoom? Do you guys see this little Zoom window?
I see a big Zoom window.
Oh, sorry. This big Zoom window, it says like my personal meeting room and stuff like that.
Oh, wait, no.
No? Okay, I can't show you guys. Zoom blocks other Zoom windows apparently. But if you go into the settings, let me just look at this for myself. You guys can't see any of this, right? It's a little.
Yeah,
setting.
I can see this.
Oh, you guys can see this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Okay, I don't know what they block. If you're recording with Zoom, I believe you can actually keep, what's it called? It's not on here. I'd have to look into that. Oh, wait.
Next to the shared screen.
Yes, that's what you want right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never used Zoom for the videos.
Yeah, it definitely would be different depending on what you use. Alvaro, what do you use?
OBS.
OBS? Yeah, OBS is a lot more powerful. Like, you can definitely change things around as you want. Yeah.
I've used Zoom, so I'll just, that works.
Yeah, I wouldn't stress out too much about it because it's a very small portion of this. But if you do want to play around with something else, like, totally use it. I think another one I know students have used is like Loom. Sorry. Loom, the same thing where it puts a little video corner, looks something like this.
Oh, cool.
A bunch of looms. It looks kind of like that. So if you want your little like bubble self talking, I don't know if you want to point at things or something while you're talking, but yeah.
Sweet. Thank you.
No problem. Cool. So let's see here. But don't stress too much about the video. Blog, this is just general advice for blogs, like especially for these ones, don't feel like you have to be, I think sometimes people get really harped up on blogs being like, oh, I don't want to come off, like I don't want to say the wrong thing or something like that. And you might say the wrong thing or whatever, but I think for the most part, you guys do pretty decently in the blogs you guys have written. It should be relatively technical. It shouldn't be like, this was a great experience, and like, la da da da. Like, definitely you want to put your blog to say, hey, look, I can communicate technical things, because that's the whole point of either talking to other data scientists or talking to stakeholders about the data science technical work that you did. So gearing it towards that direction, right? So just make sure you guys keep it in that vein. So that means like code snippets, visualizations, and all that. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
My last blog post got shared on Medium by their curators, And then now I feel a pressure, like, is everyone going to be as good as this one? And then, like, if it's not, I'll be disappointed. Like, you know.
Definitely don't stress out about it. But that's really great. And that's why here, you know, that's one thing I will say that I've noticed a lot of people who use like Medium, stuff like that. It gets like curated, like curators will share it and stuff like that. But don't feel that pressure too, because like everything is going to have its own value. And like, like maybe it takes every 2 blogs or something like that to have like one that's shared and stuff like that. So I wouldn't stress out too much about it, but I totally understand that pressure too. Like, it's like, oh no, like I did really well on this one. Oh shoot, I gotta do well on the next ones now too.
Exactly.
And I think I saw someone went on mute if they wanted to comment on that or related. No? Okay. Yeah. That's really great. Especially, you know, feel free to share it with each other too. And like, you know, like if you guys are on Medium, you know, give it a clap or whatever, a like, a heart, I don't know, all the different things social networks do. Yeah, anyway, any other, I think that's kind of it. That's all I really want to talk about general advice. I know I've shown you guys this notebook at least once before, at least maybe a quick part of it. I think I showed it to you guys, maybe I'm wrong. But it is on the repo here too. But it's useful for you guys to go over, especially as you guys get into Capstone, since it's going to be the thing that you talk about the most probably with like a recruiter, a hiring manager, and all that stuff. Yeah. Cool. All right, so we have about 10 more minutes left. I want to open it up for any questions at all you guys have or anything you guys want to talk about related to Capstone or job search and all that stuff. And then while you guys think about that, if there's any questions, I will share this link for discussion questions on Zoom.
I was listening to a blog post. It was more for software engineering, but they were talking about using linters on the code. Is there a linter for Jupyter notebooks?
They're linters for Python. So if you're writing in Python, you just look for they're online linters. So
right.
Yeah, me and you were the only 2 on that. I was hoping there'd be more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that interview thing.
Yeah.
Which one was that? Is that like couple weeks ago?
Yeah. They have one this week, and that was last week.
Yeah.
They have one. There's 3 of them. One a week. I think I missed the one this week.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, yeah. You can get linters. I mean, you just do a search for it, and there are a bunch of online linters.
Yeah, I saw some. I just was wondering if there was something that you could. It was built
like plug into Jupyter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I don't actually know. When I get some really serious code and stuff like this, I usually use like VS Code or another IDE, which has like, if you guys aren't familiar with what linters are, right? Basically, it's like a grammar check for your code to kind of see like, hey, if like it's gonna run properly and stuff like that. I feel like someone had brought this up, like another instructor brought this up as a plugin, and I don't think I have it installed. Oh, it's not. I don't have my plugins installed on this part. Oh well. I'll get back to you guys on that. And if you guys find something too that works for Jupyter Notebook, they actually can use like a linter, maybe.
Yeah, I had never heard of that before.
Might be.
That's really interesting. Linters.
This might be their closest one that's from MD Extensions.
Yeah, they're indispensable sometimes. When you really want to present professional looking code and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, I can't really give you an answer, Mike. But maybe check out Hinterland. That might be the closest thing of what you might be looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely code like cleanliness and stuff like that can be, it just puts your code at an extra level. It's that icing on the cake. It's not going to be the thing that's like people are looking for and be like, oh, did you do this specific? I mean, some people might, but like, it's going to be more about the stuff that you do and the way you talk about it and showing you results and stuff like this. And then anything on top of that is just gonna basically think of it like, if you were in their position, would you want to hire you? Like, would you want someone who has a bunch of like functions that are called X or XX or, you know, L, like XX of L, you know, it's like, that's hard to manage and stuff like that. So you want to give them as many reasons as possible to hire you versus not hiring you.
Yeah, this was a hiring manager that was
Oh, good.
doing this, and he basically said, always run your stuff through a linter. Any code that I view, you know, I want it to look like professional code. And so he said the easiest way to do that is make sure to run it through a linter.
Yeah, because it's going to show that I think it shows that you take effort into your code. I will say there's a lot of code in the industry that is complete garbage and trash, and just like, unfortunately, that's some places, especially for like non-tech focused places. But even then, I've seen some really interesting things from places that from people should know better. But it definitely stands out because, again, you want to emphasize saying, hey, no, I'm a cool person to work with. Like, I'm not one of those garbage people who just like throw random functions onto a screen. Sometimes you'll hear people kind of brag a little bit of being like, oh, I did this coding session, you know, like in the past, like I just opened up a can of beer and was like coded away for all night and I got this thing done. And it's like, that's cool and all, but like, got to make sure it's readable. And usually the people who brag about that, in my experience, are the people who, I don't want to read their code. I don't want to look at their code. It's usually trash and junk and random stuff. And it's the worst thing ever. This has happened to me.
Yeah. bugs and vulnerabilities.
The thing is that the code could work perfectly fine. I had a couple instances. One was, I had some code that someone had written about 3 years prior, or maybe even longer than that. But they had this code, it was written in JavaScript, and they needed to put it basically in Java for reasons. And I was looking at their code, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a bunch of junk. Like, there literally was a section where it says, old code, do not delete this, but didn't say what it was. And I asked, you know, the person who kind of gave me this, like, hey, like, so what exactly is this? Like, yeah, so he said, like, yeah, it turns out there was like a college student that they hired part-time wrote this code, but they've been using it ever since it's been built. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, well, I have to convert this into Java. And so it's going to help me. Like, what does it do exactly? Like, what exactly is this process? And they're like, we don't know. Like, we know it works, but we don't know exactly what it should be outputting. And I'm like, this is dangerous. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I can take my time to go through it. And basically, in short, I ended up not doing that job because I was like, I'm not going to spend all my time trying to debug not debug, but like parse through and understand someone else's code. I've also had cases where I had to like, oh, this person said, oh, I did this code really quickly, you know, really awesome. They're like, they were really proud of it. And I looked at the stuff and I'm like, what the heck is all this random junk in different places and stuff? And I'm like, I need to put this on like a server on a date, like basically do the data engineering side. I'm like, I can't do this unless I know what it is. I'm like, I get rid of this. I basically have to rewrite the whole thing myself. And what's even more frustrating about that one is that sometimes the person who originally wrote the code and talks about it gets a little bit more credit than the person who actually does all the work and have to do all this stuff. So don't show to hiring managers that you're not that person, because no one really wants to work with those people.
Also, one other thing is, if you want to show finished code, right, make sure you go over it, and any debugging code that you put in there, you take out, you clean it out, right? You might put some extra stuff just to make sure your code works, but that shouldn't be there when your code is finished, right? You should take out all of the debugging.
Absolutely. I will say you don't necessarily have to take it out if you plan accordingly. So one thing I like to do is I'll put like a debugging flag. And so when I know, like, I'm using this to debug stuff, for example, everyone loves to put print statements to kind of check what it's doing. Like, if it's a long piece of code, actually putting print statements, but you don't need that at the very end. I will like try to actually label it with like, what's it called? Like a little octothorpe, a little number pound sign, right? Comment that says like, you know, debug. And that way I know where to find those parts. And as I go through it, I try to do like, you know, if debug flag, basically equals true, do this thing. And that way I can just simply like change the debug flag, preferably in the function itself. So I'm getting a little kind of looks like, what are you talking about, Victor? So maybe I'll kind of show you guys really quickly what that might look like.
Yeah,
so like,
that's cool, except if you have like information that shouldn't be in there.
Yes,
right?
Definitely not.
So a lot of times, just for debugging purposes and stuff, there may be passwords that shouldn't be in production. There may be, areas where you can code inject that shouldn't be in production. So
oh gosh, okay. I will tell you guys right now. If you're doing that while debugging, don't do that if you can. Like, don't ever. I will tell you right now. Don't ever paste a API token, a password directly into your notebook, because you're going to forget about it one day and you're going to save it, and it's just a bad habit to do it. Those safe practices are going to be the best thing. I've seen people also do like print after they have like an API token, and then they print out the API token and they completely forget, because it's like X, which is like a bunch of parameters. So there's like params, and then they'll like print params, but in that params is like the API token, and they'll completely forget about it. Like, so don't ever like basically put that in there. You want to do the safe stuff. If you guys are curious, what you want to look up is os.environment. Oh my gosh, I think that's right. You guys are gonna make me look it up now.
Environment.
Well, it's not. It's an abbreviation.
Yeah.
What's that? Environ. So that's how it. Basically, this will right here. You can save this now on the local machine, not in the notebook itself, and call, for example, like secret key. And so you have something like secret key defined in your computer, and then you can actually call this over and actually run it this way. This way, at least your notebook should not, like contain the actual information there. But this is usually where people get really messed up, because this happens all the time. Yes, I'll say that right now, don't put sensitive information printed out if you're trying to debug and stuff like that, like delete it immediately. But if you do have debugging stuff, you could be like if debug. And then like, whatever your normal code is, like how you have to. So this will happens like if you now have, let's say, I'll say, this is obviously junk code, but like this. And now if I actually have a function, right? And I put in like, let's say the number 20, right? This should just return 21, right? Yeah. And so that's like, okay, what if I want to debug it? I can do debug, oops. Oh my gosh, I can't type today. Debug equals true. And then this is actually my debugging code. So like I said, so that way I can have certain actions that I'm using to do stuff. For example, I might actually have something like a break statement, like let's say let's just return, because I don't want it to keep going. And so it won't actually execute the rest of this. So this is really useful, because a lot of times what people will do is they'll just keep this without any of these things. And then they forget what's actually useful information versus just because you were trying to figure things out. It's usually easier if you can think, like, okay, like I'm doing stuff that's not important, but it's useful for me to check out. And then that way you can kind of quickly get rid of them as you need to, or keep them in there and just have this debug flag. That's what I've kind of done a lot of. I'm sure there's a lot of other people who've done different things that have worked well for them. You just got to find out what works well, and then honestly talk to other people about what you have too, because like you might do something unsafe, right? So like, when you're in the job, like in the actual job, maybe this is not the best option. Maybe there's other things you should do. So that's where code reviews, where someone else looks at your code and sees what works well.
That's what I was just about to say. And usually each organization, they'll have a handy, guideline for you.
Yeah.
These are the things we look for in code reviews. So.
And I will say is that ideally, yes. Unfortunately, not everyone. So I will say is if you do come across a job that like just doesn't have that level of sophistication of like trying to do that, especially if you're doing a little more contract work, make one for yourself. Like I've literally talked to people who are contracting who literally will have their own style guide that only they use, that's just for them. But they'll at least follow it so they can look at their own code and know that they're doing the proper stuff. But of course, in the job, like if they have a style guide, that's what you should do and go talk to them. Yeah, cool. I know we're kind of over time, but any last questions before we head out then? Pretty good. Okay, so I shared this link to the document in there. I'll put in the, I guess this is a recording, so I'll put in the description box too. That way, if you guys go back to this recording or something, that you guys can find it. But I think I'm going to put a few things on here. So handling data for your repo. Let's see here. We want to talk about baseline models eventually, right? And then let's see. There's another one that's we're talking about. Oh, I want to say using Colab and Kaggle kernels. So I know we talked about Colab when I showed you guys, you know, back when neural networks, we were kind of showing a little bit of the traffic sign stuff, but it's useful to go through. This way, if you're using anything that uses GPU and resources, we can talk about that. Kaggle kernels also is another free resource that can be super useful. I see here Git and GitHub, just all the time. So we can talk about like making sure how to inform your Git and GitHub, you know, properly and stuff. Yeah, any other things that we might want to talk about in the future off the top of your guys' heads?
Referencing, you talked about how to use large, that.
References like in job, right? Or
how to use, like how to reference larger data sets.
Yeah, so let's go. Like that, yeah. So we can talk about that all together. It's just handling data and trained models. There you go, because that's kind of related to each other. Okay.
What about, I know that James Irving has, both when he was a student, because I was a student when he was originally, and he uses, he'll import functions that he's created from another document. And I don't remember if it has to be like a PyScript. So basically, yeah, just a .py file, or if you can actually do that, put those together in a Jupyter notebook. I mean, I wouldn't see why you couldn't, but yeah. Because I mean, that can be helpful to just be able to pull in, you know, various functions or refer to that document rather than having them all in your notebook.
Yeah, that's the most ideal. So like if you guys are kind of wondering, I know James, one of the other instructors, right? He likes doing this, and I think it's a really good practice. Is, for example, like I think there was one back some point in the curriculum, there's like import like fs or something like that, and it was a file that's actually in like, you know, fs.py. And so you can actually import, for example, I'll just show you guys really quickly since we're here. You guys okay if I go a little bit over, right? Yeah. You guys never mind. All right, so let's just get a new file. Let's call it as fs.py. And let's say you have a definition of like, I don't know, function. I'm super creative, right? So x, and we'll just say return, this is x. There you go. So we can have something like this. This is gonna do some funkiness, but we'll see what we can do. So we can do something like import fs, and I can do like fs dot, oops. I should put it up. So you can like do whatever you want here. So this is what we're talking about, like making a bunch of functions here, and then you can call them out individually. You can also do certain things like, for example, there's a dictionary, for example, that you use very commonly. Let's say, for example, you have like the dates and the months and stuff like that that you call frequently, or something, some reference like this. You can also do something like, you know, like my data, say my data day. I don't know what I'm doing today. I'm getting tired, I think, today, which is why I'm getting like this. All right. So like you could have something like this where you can then reference this, and then I'll probably have to reset this, but let's see if we can just import it. And then, so if I can do fs dot, what's it, my data, It's not going to be happy with me. Yes, I know that. Hold on. This is just the easiest way. There you go. So you can see then I can actually keep these values in here and stuff like that and reference them. So building this up. This basically is, okay. There was part of the curriculum that we had object-oriented programming. Was that part, when we were on version 2.0 and we changed to version 2.1? Does that sound familiar to anyone? I think we did a pretty smooth transition. But if you go into Learn Co, did we talk about like object-oriented programming back to like mod 1, I think? Okay, good. That's kind of what we're referencing right here. So I don't have to say this new thing that you guys might not know, but I want to show you guys. I think it's in mod 2. Yeah.
And then while you're pulling that up, in my last project, I had like so many functions, so I put them in another notebook. And because it wasn't like a Pi notebook or like a PY notebook, it was a IPYNB.
Mm-hmm.
Then all I had to do in my main notebook was like just say like %run and then the file, and that imported all my functions.
Yeah, that's the magic command. I just love that it's called magic. Yeah, that's the right way to do it. So it was something like %run.
Yeah, and just together, I think, like no space.
Just
yeah, it was like
%run is
space, and then yeah, like fs dot, yeah.
Okay, I think that. Let's try something new. No. Yeah, this is some funkiness. I don't like doing this too much when I edit back and forth. Did I do this wrong?
But that was from another notebook, right? You were running another functions from another notebook.
Yeah, like it wasn't a Pi file, it was the IPY, like whatever.
Ooh, I don't know. I know that trick. You guys might have to show that for me one day.
Yeah, and there are extensions too for note, so that you can import notebooks.
That's what I did.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys can see the chat.
Yeah, I'll put it over here too. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
Nice. All right. I'll have to check that out. I didn't realize you could do that. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
I had to look it up because it wasn't I didn't have my functions in like a Pi document, or I don't know how you say that. Because it was in that .ipynb file, I had to like look up how to do it that way, and so that's how I found that.
That's cool. Let's see. And then so at this point, I should be able to just do func2. Yay, check that out. Nice, that's pretty cool. I honestly did not know that. Does that run, I'll have to look at that. Does that run the whole notebook though?
Yeah, so I just had one notebook that was like only my functions.
Okay, so like if I did this, yeah, so that would print out one. Okay, so cool. Yeah, that's another way you could do that too. I will say is that for the record, is that to be compatible with a lot of more people beyond like data science. So if you're working with like a machine learning engineer or data engineer or someone else who might maybe not use notebooks all the time, what you can do is if you have something like this where it's just literally just a bunch of functions, you can do file download as .py. Yep.
I hadn't seen that before. I was like, how do I save this as a Pi? Okay.
Yeah, so let me, I think I move this real quick. Hold on. It's probably easier for me just to. See, I'm glad we spent longer because I learned something new. Oops, project. Okay, where are we at? We are in projects. Oops, downloads. There it is. So then we'd have this guy right here. So it creates a PI file of your, like, so basically, essentially what I'm writing right here, but it converts your whole notebook into a .py file, which is really convenient because then you can then pass this on a lot easier versus like if someone doesn't know what an IPython notebook is, like, I don't know what to do with this .ipnb thing. Like, what do I do with this? You can just use the .py file equivalent. So yeah, cool. I learned something new today. That's exciting. Okay, I was gonna say let's see here, the object-oriented. See, I think it's in the appendix. Is it not? I can't remember where object-oriented programming is now found. I don't know if anyone knows off their head, but it's in one of the early modules, I think, either module 1 or module 2. But if you go and review that part, you can kind of go through and see what their parts are. Okay, I think that's enough for today, since we got a little bit over. Yeah, so I guess I'll end it here. Next week, I'll put in the study groups before the end of tomorrow. That way you guys can see on the study groups and stuff like that, like what we'll talk about. I always wanted to leave up, even if we talk about any one of these things, I always want to leave some time so you guys to ask questions and stuff like this. So if you do have a new question, stuff like that, put this in the Google Doc, right, of like questions you want to talk about, and we'll make sure to kind of cover those things. If you don't have to, but it does help if you do put like your name next to it, because then I know who asked it versus like, you know, like I'm like, oh, like I'm not quite sure what this means. Can someone clarify it? And no one, I don't know who answered it or whatever. That can be helpful, but you don't have to if you really don't want to. Oh wait, oh good, I can't do that. All right, everyone. Well, I'll stop it here, and I will see you guys. Well, it's just Thursday. I might see some of you guys tomorrow. The rest of you, I might see you guys on next week on assessment and whatnot. Oh, and before I forget, thumbs up. You don't have to tell me, but like, if you haven't done the end of mod survey for mod 4, please do that. You guys know where to find that, right? Right? Yeah, it's just in the module. So if you guys can do that, that's really helpful. Not only just for Flatiron, just to know what things up, but also like it helps me out too, because then if you guys have anything that you guys would like to see or constructive criticism and whatnot, or you say, oh, Victor's amazing, you know, you don't have to say that. But those are things that are definitely helpful for me and anyone who we do stuff at Flatiron. So yeah, and it's anonymous too, so I won't know who you are unless you put your name in it. So don't put your name in it unless. Don't put your name in it. Okay. All right, everyone. I will see you all later. Have a great rest of your evening. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.